Our second scripture reading for the morning is from Psalm 35. So Psalm chapter 35, or Psalm 35. And we're going to be reading verses 3 through 7. So Psalm 35, verses 3 through 7. And in your pew Bibles, that can be found on page 397. So 397 in your pew Bibles, if you'd like to follow along with that. And one more time, that is Psalm 35, verses 3 through 7. Brandish spear and javelin against those who pursue me. Say to me, I am your salvation. May those who seek my life be disgraced and put to shame. May those who plot my ruin be turned back in dismay. May they be like chaff before the wind, with the angel of the Lord driving them away. May their path be dark and slippery, with the angel of the Lord pursuing them. Since they hid their net for me without cause, and without cause dug a pit for me. So we just wrapped up a series on the excellent life of King David. And we talked about how David was an excellent example of Christ. We finished up that series by talking about a person who came into David's life by the name of Mephibosheth. That's got to be rough having a name like Mephibosheth. We're going to call him Fibby today, just in case you weren't here last week. That's the nickname we've given him. Fibby. Good old Fibby. A lot easier to say that. But this week, what we're going to talk about is how Fibby's life and how David treated him can teach us about God's grace. I'm going to start off by telling you about an experience that I had at work about a year ago. I was learning a new position, and I had a trainer by the name of Ryan who was overseeing everything I was doing. And once he started trusting me a little more, he allowed me to be a little bit more on my own. And in one of those moments where he stepped away, I made a mistake. It turned out that if it wasn't fixed, it was going to be a costly mistake. You know, they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And when Ryan came back and saw what had happened, I found out that a word can also be worth 1,000 words too. As his words made it clear that this mistake was a big deal. However, he said, I think I might be able to fix this. I asked him, what will happen if you can't? He paused for a moment. He found that it was better not to say, and he said, don't worry, I'll take care of it. He left for about 45 minutes. So 45 minutes where I'm on my own just thinking and just baking, just worried about what's going to happen next. Finally, he came back. And so in angst, I asked him, are we good? He responded back with a thumbs up, a smile, and he said, you're good. I practically collapsed in relief because I had no idea what would have happened had we not fixed this mistake. Ryan had grace. He didn't get upset with me and chastise me. He took care of the problem. And by the way, Ryan's a Christian as well. So it kind of showed Christ-like grace to me that day. And today we're going to be talking about grace. Now, grace is one of those words in Christianity that we throw around quite a bit, to the extent that sometimes it even loses its meaning, which is sad, because grace is perhaps the most important aspect of our faith in terms of how we treat one another. If you were to look up the word grace, you might find a definition like this. It's undeserved favor or goodwill. So grace is undeserved favor or goodwill. Now, our culture, their version of grace, a little bit different from our version of grace. And so I'm going to give you two examples of the way that our culture views grace that is actually the exact opposite of grace. I'm going to kick off the first example with a song. Don't worry, I'm not going to sing it. It's a Taylor Swift song, so I'm definitely not going to sing it. That'd be torture for me to sing that to you. But she had a song that has a great music video, by the way. It's called Bad Blood. And the lyrics in it are kind of interesting. There's this part where it says, you forgive, you forget, but you never let it go. You forgive, you forget, but you never let it go. Now, when you hear that, you have to ask yourself, what on earth are you talking about? You forgive, you forget, but you never let it go? Well, part of forgiveness, part of grace is forgiving, forgetting. Yes, I know that, you don't necessarily entirely forget something, but you, in that sense, you let it go. That's the essence of forgiveness. So how can you forgive and forget and not let go if that is indeed what you are doing? I think they thought that was probably profound. Not as profound as what they thought. And I have to say that when I hear the phrase, I'll forgive you, but I'll never forget. That burns me up inside. I'm not kidding. That drives me crazy. Again, I understand that you don't necessarily ever forget. But when you express that to somebody, that I'll forgive them or I'll forgive you, but I'll never forget this, that's harboring up seeds of bitterness in your heart. Our goal is to let these things go, not hold them against people. That's true grace, is not holding people's past faults against them. Another opposite example of grace, and I love this one, comes from the comic strip Dilbert. Dilbert, if you're unfamiliar with him, is an engineer in this comic strip. Very literal, very straightforward. One of his co-workers approaches him, and he says to him, I can only please one person per day. Today is not your day. Tomorrow isn't looking so good either. That's Dilbert for you. And of course, it leads into a very good point, though. What is grace? We said undeserved favor, but is it merely doing things or saying things to people that show them favor? I would posit this to you. Grace is more than just an action. Grace is an attitude, not just an act. Grace is an attitude, not just an act. John C. Maxwell once wrote, attitude isn't everything, but it is the one thing that can make a difference in your life. Okay? I think there's a lot of truth to that. There's a cliche that says attitude is everything. He goes as far to acknowledge, no, it's not everything, but it'll make a difference for you. And you know what I'll add to that? Not only is it the one thing that will make a difference in your life, for those who know you, for those who talk to you, for those in relationships with you, it'll make a difference in their life if you have an attitude of grace toward them. I heard that in some cases that people make a judgment about you or whatever you're presenting to them in the first 4 seconds. The first 4 seconds of when you meet them. They'll already make up their mind. We as believers, on the other hand, we shouldn't be like that. We should be people of grace, that when people approach us, if they mess up right away, we should, in our hearts, know this isn't who they are all the time. First impressions don't always tell us everything about a person. As we move into our story about David and good old Phoebe, one of the impressive things about this story is that David had a lot of reasons that he could have been judgmental and could have held a grudge against Phoebe. He chose not to. No hard feelings. and no wrath against him. So if you are bitter, you are angry, or you continue to look down on somebody who maybe wronged you in the past, you're not really showing them grace, even if some of your actions display such a thing. This is sad because our culture, in many ways, they show that our relationships are disposable. That if somebody wrongs you, it's okay just to throw that relationship out the window. And don't get me wrong, I understand there are moments when people are so hurtful, so consistently, that you don't need to put yourself around them. But an attitude of grace is in these minor instances where people just make a mistake or maybe don't realize what they're doing, is to show them that you still love them, you still care about them, and that it's okay, that you're not going to be somebody that eternally holds a grudge against them. So how do we receive grace? It's one thing to talk about giving grace. It's kind of hard, though, sometimes to receive grace as well. In 2 Samuel chapter 4, we begin Phoebe's story. We learn something very interesting about him there. His uncle, when his Ishbosheth, that is his name. Don't they have wonderful names? Mephibosheth, Ishbosheth. Had been hard in school. But his uncle, after Saul, the king, which would have been his uncle's father, was killed in battle, Ishbosheth would have been first in line to take the throne. Somebody didn't like that so much. They killed him. Phoebe was about 5 years old when he heard this news, and his nurse scooped him up, ran off with him, but she dropped him, and this made him disabled in both of his feet. So the rest of his life, he was fearful that David was going to catch up with them one day because he knew that his grandfather had this grudge against David and even tried to kill him multiple times. Sent his whole army after him. Phoebe stayed in hiding while David established his kingdom. And finally, one day, David said, I need to bless somebody from Saul's family. Can you believe that? I need to bless somebody from Saul's family. And so he sent people out, found Phoebe. He had been horrified. But then David's response to him was, you are my best friend's son. I'm going to take care of you. You're going to live a royal life. That's what I believe you deserve. Because your grandfather was a king. Your father could have been a king. And so I'm going to treat you as royalty because I was friends with your father. Now think about this. David never had any ill intent toward Phoebe. From the get-go, even when these people murdered Ishbosheth, David harbored no hard feelings against Saul's family. If Phoebe and his nurse had chosen not to run away from him, he would have still had his ability to walk. Had he not hidden away for all these years, he wouldn't have had to suffer as a lame person by himself, without friends, without aid. He could have been living in royalty this whole time. So in receiving grace, let this be a lesson for us as well, that when there's somebody that we have a grudge with, that they have something against us, or maybe they come to us to extend grace out to us, don't run from them. Don't avoid them. Allow them to do this, because the blessings that you'll get to experience by receiving grace far outweigh all the awkwardness that you avoid by staying away from them. Even though Phoebe ran away from grace, grace caught up with him in the end, because that is exactly what grace does. It chases after you. So we talked about grace, what it is, our culture's version of grace, giving grace, receiving grace, and now something that's very difficult. We're going to talk about what to do when people don't give you grace. What do you do when people don't give you grace? Sometimes you do all the right things. You have grace toward other people, and they reject you. They treat you poorly. That's no reason to get bitter toward them. In fact, Psalm 37, verses 5 through 6 say, Commit your life to the Lord. Here's what he will do for you if you trust in him. He will make the reward for your godly life shine like the dawn. So even though others might not be gracious to you or might reject the grace that you give out to them, we need to show grace to others. And God, in turn, will show grace to us as well.